Welcome back to Turning the Key to Real Estate. I'm your host, Nicholas Fegley.
And Heather Patron-Shook.
Well, everybody, we are back today, and I am out on the road. I am in Lancaster, Pennsylvania today. Brett, where are you at?
I am in South Carolina today, celebrating the holidays down south where it's been in the low 70s the last couple of days.
Yeah. So it's hitting the news, and the settlement is officially approved.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me what that means. Let's help everybody understand now that the settlement has been fully approved. What goes in effect? Do we know when things go in effect? What's been actually happening between August and now? Give me the lowdown.
August to now has been, I guess if you're going to use golf parlance, it's been a series of mulligans, do-overs, right? This has been the period of time where the practitioners, the industry has been given the free opportunity to try to understand what the settlement is requiring, what the terms of the new rules require, and trying to figure out how to adjust practices accordingly so that when, and at the time it was presuming that the settlement would be approved, so that once it's approved and we go live, if you will, it shortens down the exposure, or lessens the exposure that realtors have for those who haven't quite figured out what needs to be done. It was an important period of time for MLSs because, as you know, because we've talked about it many times, MLSs were not part of the lawsuit. They weren't directly sued under the main lawsuit. They were brought in on some of the copycats, and they weren't involved with the settlement negotiations. They weren't involved with figuring out how to implement these changes. And it was sort of dropped in their lap with a good luck and Godspeed approach, figure it out. And they have, at different levels of intensity. Your MLSs some have taken a very draconian approach and have imposed significant fines for realtors who are not complying with the terms of the settlement. Others have taken a more regionalistic approach. For example, in areas where you have maybe small MLSs, they're not quite as significant financially because they're sensitive to their members' needs. So here we are. Everything that has been leading up to this point that people have been doing right, you've had the opportunity to get better. That people have been doing wrong, hopefully you've had the opportunity to learn what needs to be done, what you need to do differently. And I think realistically there's an expectation of a learning curve, but we've had since August 17th was the deadline. Really, we've had since March 15th to start figuring out what to do. That's when the notice of the settlement dropped in everybody's lap.
So if we look at from August to today,
Mm-hmm.
and in that time frame, the MLSs had already put their practices in place. NAR, set the standard of how things should be going. They basically implemented the settlement months in advance, which,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of really like. But when you look at that, would you say that this was that kind of learning curve now is what was really happening between August and today, if that makes sense?
I think there really was a learning curve. Depending on where you were geographically, in the United States, and what practices were being implemented or what brokerage, we can drill it down to a more micro level, what brokerage you belong to figure out how different brokerages implemented changes internally to deal with the terms of the settlement that were negotiated. I think having read a number of the filings at the end of the, as we got to the end of the time, reading the motion and recommendation or suggestion for approval that the plaintiffs filed, reading the position statement that was filed by the Department of Justice Sunday night before a Tuesday hearing. And it was 5 pages long, I think, of text. Not that it didn't pack a little bit of a punch, but it's also looking at all the things. I think that the biggest thing that realtors, I think the biggest focal point for realtors right now really needs to be um, for buyers agents to stop modifying your buyer agency contract upward. I mean, that was that covered about 4 or 5 pages of the plaintiff's suggestions for approval of the settlement agreement. Um, and whether you agree with or disagree with the impetus behind the lawsuit, what happened, and everything else, um, you need to appreciate that it's not just the plaintiff lawyers that have been saying this, but also it's been lawyers and industry leaders and realtors from across the country have been saying, guys, this is what we're dealing with. Negotiate your fee with your buyer, and that's what you get paid. And so if you're got a fee with your buyer and the listing broker or the seller's offering more money, can you go change your contract? No. That's counter to what the settlement was intended to constrain. The idea was for buyers agents to negotiate their fee with their buyer. Now, once you've negotiated that fee, have at it. Go after go through the transaction and do your job as an agent, like you've always done, and try to see how much of your fee, if you're the buyer's broker, how much you can have the seller or the listing agent absorb. And I think more and more people, me included, have come into the camp of, stop dealing with broker to broker compensation. Let's get that off the practice model as soon as we can, so that we can do a better job of focusing on the industry and the better job of focusing on being better agents, better practitioners. Doing what's right for your clients without forgetting what's right for you. And I think now that what a lot of people, I don't know, they appreciated while the MLSs were enforcing the rule changes, you were not violating the settlement because the settlement terms hadn't been approved.
Mm-hmm.
Now the settlement terms are approved, and if you continue to do things, if realtors continue to try to hack the settlement, they're at risk of getting sued. And if
Correct.
they're found to have violated the terms, the obligations of the settlement agreement, one of the risks that they face is to no longer be considered a released party. The benefit of being a released party is you cannot be sued for the conduct that occurred during the time frame of the settlement agreement. Well, if you lose that protection, all of the things that Nick, that you and your colleagues were doing, during the time prior to the verdict, that were found to be antitrust. I don't care if you agree with it or not. A jury found that these things are antitrust. And so the release of liability says during that 4 year stretch, 5 year stretch, whatever the window was, you can't be sued for that because you're being released from the lawsuit. It's not just the ability to be sued for the things that you've done since the settlement. It's the exposure to everything that went on in the 4 year period in the interim. And logic dictates more than suggests that if you're doing what you've always done and what you're doing today violates the terms of the settlement, then what you're doing today and what you did before is what fell in the wrong side of the verdict. So, what happened for those out there that want to preserve the way that things were? I want to go back to doing the way that things we always did. Too bad, that's gone. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it's gone.
It
And
is.
is it a bad thing? Well, this isn't the time to debate whether or not it was a bad thing. We can whine about that over a beer in a couple of months or a couple of years. I really think that there's a lot of things that are going on in the industry right now and are in the immediate future that warrant better attention than spending time worrying about how we got to where we are right now. We're here.
Go with it and move on.
Yeah.
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 I would like to add a caveat that I'm those ones that caused the issues because Nick did do things correctly, but
Absolutely, you did. It was a generic statement for everybody listening. It was just a generic statement, Nick, not
I was
commenting.
ahead of the curve.
You're ahead of so many curves, Nick.
What happens when you have the right legal counsel on your side? So, talk to me about. some recommendations that you would make to agents that are struggling with this right now.
Mhm. Well, if you have
And this is not legal advice.
no,
If you like,
not legal advice, not brokerage advice. I'm not your broker. I'm not your attorney. I'm not giving you legal advice. Don't take this as legal advice. This is sort of the practical outcome. Thank you for putting that up there. Uh, I like that.
I
So
love our new system.
perfect. Most agents, well, agents that practice on both sides, right, that are both listing agents and buyer's agents. If you're doing listing work, most agents that I've talked to have a fairly evolved listing presentation in which they understand what they're going to do, and they're going to go in and they're going to sell their skill set, their services to the seller, and they're going to charge their fee, whatever that might be. And many agents, I'm hearing more and more agents from around the country talk about offering different levels of service, and negotiating different price points for different services offered. I'm hearing more and more, agents, real, whether it's buyer or seller side, offering ancillary services as part of the fees that they're going to earn and things of that nature. So on the seller side, if you've got this sophisticated and evolving listing practice, take that skill set and apply it to buyers, because anybody that understands residential real estate appreciates the value that a realtor, a buyer's broker, brings to the transaction. Undeniably valuable, in my opinion. They bring great value and skill. You've got buyers that don't do this very often, that are wrapped up in the emotion of the situation. I've yet to run into a residential real estate transaction that's not emotional, for the buyers at the very least. And if you're an emotional and you're in an emotional state, then you're not making sound business judgments, sound business decisions. Um, I guess I was out in, must have been when I was in Boston, at the NAR convention, talking to somebody who's both an attorney and a real estate agent. And they talked about how, and I'm counseling my clients and I'm doing, this, that, and the other. And then, I went and I sold my house, and now I'm just another seller. Right. I have the open house. I leave the house and I find myself texting my agent as soon as it's done, asking how many people were there, when I know that doesn't matter. And I know I shouldn't be asking it, but I just can't stop my thumbs from tapping out the question. So it doesn't matter what your level of involvement in the industry is. When you're a consumer, don't lose that. And that particular agent, very experienced agent, offered the story that, look, I'm smart enough to know that I can't represent myself in a transaction in which I have emotional ties. So I hired a professional. I hired a buyer broker. I hired a listing broker to represent me in the transaction. So on the listing side, what is your value? You have it. You need to be developing the same level of sophisticated buyer agent presentation to the buyers that you do for your sellers. And I think, some might argue that you have to be more sophisticated. I've heard many practitioners, this isn't Woodburn speaking all what Woodburn thinks. This is what I've heard other practitioners say, is that the responsibilities and job of the buyer's agent are far more complex than they are for a listing agent. You have a lot more can go wrong on the buyer side than the listing side. And taking that at face value, not whether or not it's right or wrong, but taking it at face value, that suggests to me that you need to devote the level of energy at least equal to, if not greater than, the energy you devote when you're putting together a listing presentation. And that's what you can do as a buyer's agent. If you haven't done it, do it. um, your fee. Stop worrying when you're talking about the buyer. Talking with the buyer and the buyer's agent. Stop worrying about what the seller is or isn't doing. Stop worrying about what the listing broker is or isn't doing. Worry about what you're doing for your buyer and what your buyer is willing to compensate you. Um,
It really shocks me. I'm not going to lie. It really shocks me that agents have a difficult time. Some agents have a difficult time negotiating out that fee or having that conversation when there's nothing in this world anymore for free. You walk into an attorney's office, you sneeze, and it's $2,500.
right.
You walk into a
That's just
doctor's
disinfectant.
office,
It's expensive.
it is. And You walk into a doctor's office and you're paying a fee. You walk into Walmart and you don't get out of there for less than $500, although I've never been in a Walmart in the past 6 years. I'm very proud of that, but Amazon, let's not talk about them. They take all my money. But, everything you do. So when you walk in to buy a car, you're paying money. So I don't understand why so many people are having a difficult time going, hey, buyer, my fee is X. If the seller's willing to pay some of it, great. If not, we can ask for it. If not, this fee is yours to pay. I don't understand why people have
Hmm.
a struggle doing so. Um, I know that there's definitely mentor programs out there if you guys are
Yeah.
looking for something to get a little bit more education on a way to do that. Um,
Remember, a couple of years ago, NAR had to amend the code of ethics, add a standard of practice to make crystal clear to agents, buyers agents, that you can't market your services for free if you're getting paid. I
mhm,
mean, you would think you, Nick, understand that that's makes common sense,
correct.
but common sense is probably one of the most rarest things you're ever going to find in the free world. It's not common, it's uncommon sense. So when you stop and think, if you look at some of the industry reports that have come out, go back to 2015 in the danger report that was published by T360, and they talked about the threat that the vast majority of part-time and poorly trained agents are going to have a negative impact on the industry as a whole. And we've seen that. I mean, I think you want to know, why are we here? Here's why: because you've got a lot of agents who don't have the right education, the right level of training, the right mentoring, to get out there and be good and professional about what they do. Why can't I talk about how much I'm going to charge as a buyer's agent? Because for the last 5 years, I've been telling everyone that my services are free, and I'm not doing anything differently. So how can I, in my own brain, accept the fact that they're not free? Well, the simple answer is they never were. But for whatever reason, you were saying things like that, and so here we are.
So, Brett, when we look at what's to come and
Hmm.
we really gauge, what has changed over from August to today,
Hmm.
I like to say that in Pennsylvania, barely anything changed. When I say barely anything, there's a few extra things that I have people sign, and there's a few things that are crossed out.
Hmm.
It's very small of what's affected
Hmm.
me, but I'm not your normal agent. There were things I was doing that even you said to me the first time I sent something to you with it. You're like, "Oh, proud of you. I'm glad you're doing that." So when we look at that truly in Pennsylvania, do you agree? Not much has truly changed to the way we practice.
Um, I think that I'm gonna get your counter ready. It depends. All right, and it depends on the perspective, right? So an agent that has your approach to what you do, you treat it as a profession, and you hold yourself to a higher standard. So the impact of the settlement is what I heard. I'm going to steal a phrase from somebody I heard on a different podcast, and that this is a nothing burger. You got two buns with no meat in between. And I think that people that practice real estate like you do, Nick, view it that way. That not much has changed. And I think it's important to remind the listeners, the settlement agreement is a contractual resolution of a disputed claim in a lawsuit. It is not a change in the law. The law doesn't require any of this because of the lawsuit. Now, it's also important to understand that in Pennsylvania, none of the expectations of the lawsuit are contradictory to what Pennsylvania law has always been. In fact, they're consistent with or just simply restate what was expected of you already under Pennsylvania law. So when I talk with agents who conduct themselves as professionals, who have treated real estate as their primary source of income, and they've taken a lot of time to really hone their skill set. The leaders, the top 1/10 of 1/10 of 1%. their reaction is like, yeah, okay, I don't understand. I don't understand what this is all about. It took them it took them a half a minute to figure out that, hey, I need to stop offering
It's 4 o'clock.
to take a half a minute to figure out that I need to stop offering compensation as a listing agent, as a buyer's agent. I need to stop asking about it. I need to just simply put it in the agreement and negotiate it as part of the terms of the contract, and let's move on. Whereas others are mired in the backwards thinking of oh my God, it's my fiduciary duty to make sure my buyer knows how much I'm getting paid. Well, you need to, if that's what you think, you don't understand fiduciary duty very well. So yeah, I think that if we look at the requirements of the lawsuit, Nick, and we compare them to what licensing law in Pennsylvania and fiduciary law in Pennsylvania, frankly, has been for ever, for at least since 1999, then we don't see a whole lot of dramatic impact at this point in time. We just don't. Doesn't mean that it hasn't been a major impact on individual practices, um,
Yes.
but those are two very different things.
So going into 2025,
Mm-hmm.
if Brett had a crystal ball,
Mm-hmm.
what does Brett predict?
I think by the time we get to 2025, your best agents will have already defined their practice for 2025. They will already have captured their market share, and they will be going into the spring market with a lot of momentum and a lot of skill. You're going to see a consolidation, I think, of real estate into your best, your most professional, to those that are willing to learn and to adapt their practices. I think that the threats to the industry are not over by a long shot. I think that this creates a platform. I think we're in a litigious world. We've been in a litigious world for a long time. The success that these lawyers had with the lawsuit is not going to dissuade anybody from pursuing anything else. I think that the business models that involve paradigms where there's offers of compensation between brokers are going to come under close scrutiny, and I think that we need to be cognizant of that. I think that there's going to be I think there's a lot of hope out there that with the new administration that the regulatory impact on real estate is going to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great, maybe it does, and if so, that gives us a chance to take a breath.
Uh-huh.
But that doesn't mean that we should stop looking at things. I think that I think there are a lot of great opportunities out there. I think for the real estate industry, there's an excellent opportunity for growth. That those who want to do it and who want to succeed, I think you're going to see a platform for a lot of change at the MLS level. You're a member of Bright MLS. Is that the only MLS you belong to?
It is, yes, because I refuse to join others. I feel like it should be statewide, but that's just me.
Think about the people that are listening that belong to. I talked to an agent and in one of my associations, and I think they said they belong to 7 or 9 different MLSs.
Mhm.
And you belong to Bright MLS, which is certainly the largest MLS in Pennsylvania. And depending on who you're talking to, whether you're talking to Renee Galassi at Bright or you're talking to Ed Zorn at CRMLS, California Regional MLS, depending on which one you're talking to, they'll tell you that they have the biggest MLS in the country. Suffice to say, they're the 2 largest MLSs in the country. And so they look at it one way, but I think what's becoming more poignant and prevalent is a recognition that the boundaries, the jurisdictional boundaries of MLSs don't match up to the jurisdictional boundaries of real estate agents. And
Which can
if
be very frustrating.
it can be very frustrating, it can be very expensive. You can get different qualities of information. I think there's a shifting mindset in the role of the MLS. Here's a funny thing. I was sitting in a session, and I don't remember honestly if it was a podcast, or if it was at the NAR NXT conference in Boston, or one of the other conferences I attended. But someone had said that if you ask, you do these surveys, right, that realtors respond to, and the question is, how many of you believe that the MLS has lost value since it no longer is a platform to offer compensation. And it's like something crazy, like 56% of agents say that the MLS has lost value. Until you start asking them questions and they start thinking about their responses, then you find that that's not accurate. They really don't think that it's lost value. When you start, that's their first reaction. Their knee jerk reactions. Oh yeah, it's lost value because they don't know how much I'm getting paid. Notice that when you say that, who's you're putting at the center of that conversation? It's me. How much am I getting paid? What's coming to me? What's
Yeah.
in it for me? As opposed to when you start talking to agents and they start articulating that and it's not even the number one value is I don't think it's marketing anymore. I think it's the value of the data and the tech. And you have MLSs evolving into data companies and tech companies. I think you're going to see a lot of that coming up into 2025. And what services, who is the primary customer of an MLS, and is that going to change? Maybe not the primary customer, but are we going to start seeing, MLSs on a more consumer-facing platform? Are they going to start offering services to consumers, different from maybe what you're offering brokers, but start looking at that type of thing. The MLSs that are still committees of associations and evaluating whether that model has to change or should change. That's what's so I think that there's, like I said, there's so many opportunities that are presented to the real estate industry and to the agent that's plugged in. I think it's a great opportunity for the associations to reassert their value for memberships. I think that recognizing that one of the greatest values that an association offers is its advocacy, and it's an opportunity for associations to re-identify the value that they present to their members. Clear cooperation policy, that's going to be at the forefront. I think we're going to see. We're hopefully NAR will have some guidance on where they're going to stand before the end of the second quarter. There's some hope that there's going to be something that comes down officially at the business meeting, the governance meetings or legislative meetings in May. We'll see what happens with that. So there's a lot going on out there, that's even non-litigious, right? That really is involved with the growth and the honing of skill set. There was this great expectation of an exodus out of the industry. I heard at one point people saying we're going to see a 33% reduction in the amount of realtors in the business by. I'm not seeing it. There is some attrition,
Oh, I'll
and
be honest though, I do foresee a exodus.
yes,
I know with conversations I've had, it's been 10% or less in my areas, and it's most likely going to happen when dues are due because
coming up.
we are seeing a decline in how many people have already paid them. So that's probably where we're really
Mhm.
going to see it.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even be surprised if it was over 10%, but maybe less than 20. It depends, on a larger scale, or on a statewide scale, about that. So, yeah, I think that I agree with you on that. But I think there's a lot of good. Uh, you know, a change is many many things, but it's rarely welcomed and rarely comfortable. And if it's not uncomfortable, how much changing are you really doing?
Correct.
Growth. Again, growth is not something that's intended to be comfortable. It's intended to be, um, I don't, painful might not be the right word, but certainly uncomfortable,
Yeah.
so that you're outside of your comfort zone, so that you're experiencing new things and you're developing new things. So, overall, I have a very positive outlook, um, for what the real estate industry has available to it. The real question for me is, what are the members going to do? Are they going to latch on to the opportunity to develop and grow, or are they going to take that kettlebell and wrap it around their neck and sink?
Well, guys, a lot's going to continue to change. We have Brett that will be back again and again and again. So, any questions that you guys have that you'd like non legal advice on, you're more than welcome to send them in to us through Facebook, through Instagram, and we will present them to Brett. If you're looking for legal advice, you can contact his law firm and he will gladly give you legal advice on the clock.
Right.
As always, Brett, it is a pleasure having you. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, Nick, and I think this really is the final approval of the settlement is good news overall for the industry because it puts some finality to this big albatross that has been floating out there.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, everybody, that was another episode of Turning the Key to Real Estate. I am your host, Nicholas Fegley.
And Heather Patron Shook.
Don't forget to like, follow, share for more great content like this today.